The Saga of ShaHaNon, Book 2, Emperors and Exiles, Chapter 7, Queen Mother. Theo watched himself in the mirror as he drew the razor down his cheek, removing the scruffy beard he had worn for the last year. It was strange to be back in the city, and for the final motions to be set into play. The last 2 years, Theo had spent every day moving about Awens, setting magics and people into place for what was about to come. He had the council in his pocket, and not all of it because of good reasons. Harold was one of the few whom Theo wasn't blackmailing. They would make him king by the end of the week, and all he had to do was look the part and convince the populace it was the best thing possible. He would need the people when war came, and war would come. All he could hope was that he would prove to be so much trouble, Jerome would leave him be after a few years. Perhaps when the time came, Shannon would be back on his feet and able to support him, morally, if nothing else. Theo had even sent a letter to Orion to invite him to visit the court this week, but Orion and his partner had been sent to Ferrois, and likely the letter sat unopened on his desk. Theo sighed and tried not to think about it. He missed his friends, but understood why Shannon and his men had tried to erase all memory. It was for everyone's own protection. Although Orion most certainly had been purged of the year they had spent together, Theo's memory fully returned. He had tried unsuccessfully to find Ivan when he was in Dakin several years back. He had heard rumors of the giant, even seen a poster on a wall. Word was, Ivan had sold his palaces and taken his wealth on a ship that sank in a storm. Theo didn't want to believe it, but part of him feared it true. The palaces had most certainly been sold off, and no one had seen Ivan Ushard for years. He had heard another rumor that Dave was the captain of a ship called the Firestorm, and yet another rumor that Dave's father, Elliot, had returned to the water on a ship called the Nomad. But rumors were useless, unless confirmed truth was found, and Theo had none of that. If Elliot was out of the barrier, that meant that Tavia could be as well. He had found records of Ravan being a very skilled cleric, but one who was paid remarkably low and sent to where he was almost certain to end up dead, or at least where his deeds would remain unknown. But Raven himself had vanished, as had Kelly. Nothing was all Theo could find on either of them. With so much about to shift, he really wished his friends to be there, even if they didn't remember him as Theo anymore. Theo washed the razor in the sink of water, trying to not think of his friends or the places they had been, as his thoughts always went back to Tient and the millions of lives he had taken in a single act. He drew a deep breath and sent them all an apology, praying that they understood why and could forgive him.
"My lord,"
Vin said from the doorway.
"Harold has left with 2 bishops and a handful of guards."
"Good."
In the mirror, Theo looked at the man who stood at the door. To the world, he seemed a normal-looking, half-Purtan, half-human man like a million others in the city, but under the illusions, Vin was neither. He was Pusan. Theo didn't know the man's full story and didn't think he really needed to. Vin had served him with a cold, firm devotion that was born of the fact that Theo had saved him from Jerome's men. Hidden from the world, Vin was terribly scarred. He hated Jerome and his power so strongly that Theo almost feared that Vin would turn into a very dark man to get vengeance if left on his own. Their arrangement worked well for them both. Theo got a very smart man who was devoted to him and hated Jerome as much as he did, and Vin got a way to strike at Jerome in a meaningful way.
"And you are certain my mother's guards will not be there?"
"Positive,"
Vin said coldly.
"Thank you, Vin."
Theo looked back to his face and the last of the beard that needed to come off. Vin bowed and left him to finish getting ready. All that was really left was for him to get dressed. Theo had spent years to make the wardrobe for his life in court. Every thread was spun with magic. Spells were in every stitch and embroidered detail, every button, buckle, and cord. He had layered his magic into his clothes and into his skin, cutting into his flesh, which healed over with the magics embedded. He wore his magics in layers upon layers. It would not do for him to have to pull out a wand and wave it about shouting spells. That image would not sit well with the people, but if he came across as no different than a wizard, then his use of magic would be accepted far more easily. The layering was a simple idea, hard to actually make hold, but once he had figured it out, he had taken it even beyond the magics that ShaHaNon wore. Theo rinsed his face and reached for his garments. He would make a show of having just arrived. Even now, his luggage was being hauled up to his rarely used chambers, and the staff that was employed to serve him would be warned that the prince would be home soon. He settled his mind, ran through breathing exercises to calm himself even more, and steadied himself. He closed his eyes and waited, letting the night settle over the city. Things were about to happen. He drew on his cloak and left the small apartment that Vin had just outside the palace. At the door, an unmarked carriage waited with a driver ready. The man would have no idea who had just gotten into his carriage and would drop him off at the palace gate, never knowing who his passenger was. It wasn't far, but a prince did not walk up from the harbor. Theo had one more council member to talk to before the night was over, and he was pretty sure it would happen without any prodding of his own. He had put it off for years, as a matter of fact, and every time Theo arrived at the palace, the Duke was waiting for him. The carriage stopped, and he slipped out before the driver had a chance to get down to open the door or to see his face. Vin waited at the gate. The guards bowed their heads as he passed. They crossed the front main yard to the sets of double doors and the waiting servants. The servants bowed. Clearly, some of them had been rushed, trying to get dressed and into place, but he didn't mind. Most would be sent to other positions, and his hand-picked and trained few would be brought in to cover all the tasks about him. As expected, the last council member he needed to talk to waited, watching just back from the crowd. As Theo reached the door, the man stepped forward.
"ShaHaNon, might I have an audience?"
Theo paused to look at the man. He sighed, not eager for this meeting, but nodded and motioned.
I have time now,
he said. Duke Garben fell into step with him as he went in. Theo took the shortest route up to his wing of the palace. In his chambers, he pulled out a crystal and set it on the table near the center of the room. With a whispered word, the stone activated. All magics that would seek to watch or listen to what happened in his room would be blocked and absorbed. The stone went a dull green color, indicating without a doubt that such magics were present. Already, there was a meal laid out with baskets and platters of anything they might think he'd like, as well as 3 types of wine, several whiskeys, and 4 different teas. He ran a hand over the food, letting the magics, which had been cut into the sides of his fingers, detect poison and remove it. He had taken a great deal of pain and care to make this magic perfect. He chose a small shrimp and picked it up.
Hungry?
He asked the heavy man. The Duke just scowled.
"You know why I am here. You have put me off for a decade, ShaHaNon."
Theo poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to the Duke as a peace offering to help make this go easier.
So what do you want to know?
He asked.
"I let you marry my daughter knowing you did so for money and to get your fingers into the guilds, but I assumed you would be living here with her and that I would have grandchildren by her. But you vanished and—"
He gestured at him in anger and disgust.
"You look as handsome as your mother is beautiful. How?"
Theo picked a grape and considered how to answer that.
I could say something like, the House of Lords is slow to mature, but we both know that's not the truth.
He popped the grape in his mouth.
In warped areas of the world, there are magics. If you are exposed, if you ingest, work with, or handle the energies of the warp, it affects you. Can you imagine how horrid it was for me to be stuck in that body? I have spent a decade seeking natural ways to have my body altered by the magics of the wild places.
"You're a sorcerer, and I know you are. You're the heir to lords, and your title demands no less. You're telling me you did not use your magic to change?"
Of course I did, but not the way you might think I used it. I breathed in energy of places without names, travelled warps lands, ate the meat of beasts made by such places, and bathed in waters of power.
"You use my daughter? You make her suffer when you took her life?"
I might be my mother's child, but I am not like her. I did my best for Cindy, and I never hurt her.
"But she's dead."
Yes, she is dead, but not by my hand and not by any act of mine. She was young, rash, and ran out into dark waters before I could stop her.
I'm not sure I believe you.
Theo had not realized the Duke thought so darkly of him.
To think so of me would mean you know what sort of creature my mother is, and yet you sit there and do nothing. If you thought me that sort of man, why would you entrust your daughter to me to begin with?
You were harmless. You were a sad little man, easily controlled by her, and honestly, I thought you wanted her so that you would not have to try to be with a woman. She would find her own way to have children.
The Duke's eyes narrowed, and a cold anger built in his chest.
You have changed.
You're damn right I've changed,
Theo said, a bit angry himself.
I escaped my mother, and your daughter was the first person to ever try to help me do so. She was a spoiled child, but she took risks for me that no one before her ever had. Given time, she might have made a great and strong queen, a real queen. If you had any idea how my mother was, and you did nothing, then you would be unworthy of the queen your daughter might have been. And just so you know, she didn't marry me because she hoped to get a bigger house or fancier toys. She married me because she believed that if I had support, I could become a good and strong king.
I don't believe you,
The Duke said.
I think you're a good actor, but I do not think she loved you, or that you are innocent of her death.
Theo faced the father of the woman he had once called wife. He had not thought this conversation to go quite the way it was, but he needed the Duke to understand and be on his side.
I met Cindy because her maid had a sister with whom I had a brief affair. She had a child, and I had plans to take very good care of them both. But my mother found out, and that young woman was killed. I managed to escape with the baby. Cindy was smart enough to put things together, and she sought me out, stopped me from just running, and she took the baby from me. She said my mother would never think she would have any part of it, and that she could hide my daughter where no one would know. I had no choice. My mother arrived even as we spoke, and Cindy hid with the baby. She somehow stayed hidden through my mother's interrogation. I did not reveal Cindy, and I think she was impressed by that. After my mother was gone, Cindy left a cup of water on the floor beside me, promised she would help me somehow, and went out. I have no idea what she did with my child, but somewhere in her things, in her past, there must be a way to find out, and that should be proof to you. She was my ally, and even when things were very difficult, even though she was sometimes a childish brat, she never revealed secrets she might have.
You have a child?
The Duke asked, skeptical.
Your daughter saved that baby's life. That is why I married her, not for your money or your guild command.
I cannot see my daughter doing any such thing.
Then you did not know her as well as you thought you did.
I just want the truth. I want to know how much it hurt. I want to know if you at least laid her body to rest.
When my wife died, she was gripping the hand of David Saylor, who was desperately trying to pull her out of the black mud. Ask him. I was being held back and unable to go to her. Why don't you go track him down and ask him yourself?
You know pirates?
I know many people,
Theo said coldly.
I go places others will not go. I hunt out magics that others run from, and I try to become the man your daughter had hoped I might be.
The Green Tide pirates are powerful men.
I am aware of who and what they are, Garben. As I said, Dave was there and tried to save her.
Garben looked at him a long moment, then turned and left. Theo let him go, surprised he had said so much. His own guilt over Cindy's death was behind why he had spoken as he had, and he knew it. But if Garben could find Dave, all the better. Theo sat down at the table. He ate a few more bites, then poured his wine into his plate. As he whispered, light swirled in the dark red fluid and began to reflect the images he sought. From the perspective of Harold's new amulet on his chest, Theo could see. Even though the shirt over it made the image a bit blurry, the magic worked. He watched as Harold entered the warehouse. Through the amulet, Theo could protect the man and possibly even throw a blow at the woman he so hated.
Let's see what you're up to, Mother,
he whispered.
How did you know?
Brian whispered to Harold. The counselor glanced at his bodyguard and lover as the trapdoor was being unlocked. He couldn't help but wonder how it would be to just admit the truth of their relationship to the world and not be torn apart for it. If the prince was sane and had a true idea of what he was doing, then maybe one day he could be honest about who and what he was on every level. As it was, Harold stood with his hands in his deep robe pockets and kept his expression as cool and emotionless as possible.
"I'll tell you later,"
he said, fingering the recording crystals in his pocket. He had given several to Brian, as well as to the other 3 guards who worked to open the trap door. If he had brought guards, bishops, and the constable down here for nothing, he was going to look an idiot. He sent a silent prayer to God that this was something worthy and good to be doing. Every fear and every twisted rumor of the prince crept into his mind. Harold could not help but know that the prince was the son of the woman who had abused him for most of his youth. He had no idea what the vile creature called Queen Mother had done to her own son. Her perversion was endless and insatiable. The question was whispered, whether or not the king was Theradon's true father or simply claimed, in his insanity, to be so. If he was, then Harold wondered if the woman had forced her own brother, and her touch had driven him insane, or if he had been willing. It would not surprise him to learn that the king had been forced. Harold tried not to shudder.
"Well, sir,"
Bishop Tenlar said with a smile,
"at least you did not bring me down here for nothing."
He gestured to the trap door that had taken some time to even locate. He had been about to admit that he was the target of a prank when the guards had found it hidden very carefully under a rug and straw.
"So, what's down there?"
"I am not certain, Your Grace,"
Harold said truthfully.
"I fear it is not of good order, though."
The bishop chuckled and patted his fat stomach.
"As long as it is interesting or of value to know of it, I shall never doubt a hunch of yours. It cost me nothing but dinner being hot to be here."
Harold bowed slightly to the man. He had asked the bishop because he was not corrupt in magic, just in money. If it served him to make financial gain, he would do just about anything, but he was not a bad man. The thought of black market goods gained for the church, and possibly ownership of a warehouse, was enough to get him to leave his dinner. The other bishop, however, was not so jolly. He was a firm fanatic who was harsh-handed and firm-voiced. He demanded strict obedience, but had a sense of compassion that many others with rank lacked. He would hunt down wrongdoers with unrelenting dedication. Harold trusted that the prince wanted just that. The door opened, and a gust of magic escaped, making Harold gag as if he had smelled something very rotten. Both of the bishops covered their mouths with the same reaction. Whatever was below was far from merely unpleasant. It was evil, and all good men of magic would feel it. The vibrations of the darkness would set them off in a way that was as like the smell of rot as anything that could be described. It made them ill and could not be hidden, denied, or faked.
"After you,"
the constable said to Harold, gagging a little. Harold took a deep breath, pulled out a light rod, and went to the door. He struck the bottom on his palm, making it cast up its light, and prayed that Theradon had not set him up to get killed, but had sent him here to do something good. Steep, simple steps led down to what had likely once been a wine cellar. He had no idea what he was going to find. By the reek, he doubted it was going to be pleasant, and his own fears and nightmares began to build up in him, making his hands shake and his legs not want to work. He took the steps down, one at a time. Mage lights began to come on as he went, allowing him to tap the flash rod off. Slipping it back into his pocket, he took in the chamber he had entered. He entered, allowing those behind him in as well. It took a moment for the light to rise enough to see what was stored here. It looked like a normal pantry full of jars, except it was not food that was stored. The jars held pickled heads. The heads were from men, women, and even children, all gap-mouthed and floating with their hair waving, as if there was a current in the fluids that held them. Sick dreams that Harold had thought his mind had made up began to flood back. He couldn't breathe. He put his hand over his heart to calm himself.
"Not what I expected,"
he said to Brian, trying not to gag. He could not imagine the purpose of such a collection, but he was certain she had a reason. The stink was terrible, but made no sense with the pickling. He wandered through the shelves, rather expecting to find a half-rotten corpse.
"There's a door back here,"
Brian called to Harold. Harold and the 2 priests moved to the door while the others with them spread out to investigate. The magic on the door was not very powerful, but it was sorcery. It would be very hard for anyone besides a sorcerer to open it. Brian nodded and stepped in the way of the bishops to hide what Harold was doing. The counselor unlocked the door without more work than a simple key in the lock would have been. The lock spell was almost crude for a work of sorcery, but so few knew the magic anymore that it would seem an almost impossible task to most. He opened the door and felt as if he had been hit by a wind. He stumbled back, his stomach rolling and head spinning. The amulet the prince had given him was suddenly fire-hot. It burned, but it also held back whatever was pushing at Harold. He choked on the magic and looked up. The wind that hit him burned his eyes, threatened to rip the air from his lungs and to peel his skin off, but the amulet fought back. In the room, he saw the last thing he expected, and yet he knew at once he had seen it before. In the center of the chamber, on an altar, was the queen. She was naked and blood-soaked, writhing in pleasure in a cloud of blackness that was more than mere vapors or mist. It seemed half living oil and half smoke. It twined about her, in her, with her. In her state of ecstasy, she did not even notice the open door. Somehow, Harold fumbled with the stones in his pocket. They slipped from his hand and scattered across the floor, recording all from wherever they fell. Harold was so stunned, so caught between the magic and the amulet, that he didn't move beyond that one attempt to get the stones out. Brian pulled him back as the bishops reached the door together. Bishop Rayler threw up his hands with a roar, throwing out a banishment. The queen was dropped. The blackness turned at once and attacked the bishop. Bishop Tenlar stepped in with another banishment that exploded about the room in a flash of light. Harold was blinded by it and unable to see what made the jolly man scream as he did, but whatever his fate was, it was painful. Staggering back, Harold blinked his eyes clear to see the queen on her knees snarling at them. Her eyes went from the bishops, who were both on the ground, to Harold. Panic drove him, and for the first time in his life, he dropped his masking shields and attacked the darkness without any attempt to hide his true power. He felt it roar through him, unleashed like a golden wave that hit the blackness that hung over the two priests. The evil thing left the bishops it was killing to focus on Harold. The amulet suddenly set off such a blast of power that Harold staggered back. It had not felt so much as if the magic had come from the amulet itself, as that it had come from a focus placed on it, as if someone had marked the amulet and had sent the attack through it from wherever the caster truly was. It was a trick of old, when great masters would send their apprentices into horrible places, but would go with them in spirit and use magics from a single focal point to aid them. The dark thing was gone, but smoke lingered like reeking mist. The queen screamed in rage. She rose to her feet, her eyes burning with dark magic. She lifted her lean arms and threw down power. The concussion blasted everyone back off their feet, slamming them to the floor. Harold was hurled backwards and crashed to the floor hard, cracking his head on the stone tiles. He had no idea how long he was out, but he rolled up sore and in the dark. Lights flickered a moment with the magics trying to work but shattered.
Brian?
He felt around for his partner as soon as his mind focused again.
Brian!
He lifted his hand to cast up a soft white light. Crawling to the nearest body, he saw it was not Brian, but Tenlar, his body sucked of life, sunken like a spider-eaten fly. Turning, Harold saw Rayler. The bishop was bleeding from his mouth, nose, and eyes, but seemed to be alive yet. Harold crawled to the priest.
Someone help me,
he called.
Hold on, Bishop. Don't leave us. We need you.
He gathered the man up into his lap as best he could, trying to help him breathe. The man groaned but made no other sound. Harold cast his light further for the others, but he saw what had lined the walls of the inner chamber. Jars upon jars were filled with small white stones. Most of the jars were now shattered open and spilled out on the floor. Harold knew every one of those stones was a soul stone, a soul that had been ripped horribly from its body and trapped in a solid stone by the queen. They would stay so until someone of vast power and knowledge was able to release them.
Help me!
He yelled to anyone who would hear.